The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And we're being heard around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, Simul Radio, Simul TV, and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to send me an email, it's xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Mack Maloney. Mack is the host of Mack Maloney's Military X-Files radio show. He has authored more than 40 books, including UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know, and Beyond Area 51, plus the best-selling Wingman military adventure series. He served as a consultant for a research firm working with the U.S. intelligence agencies and is a member of the rock band Sky Club. His website, www.mackmaloney.com. And Mack, welcome to the X Zone.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your radio show.
Well, we've been doing it for several years. Myself and two co-hosts are friends of mine, a guy named Wan and a guy named Commander Cobra. They're both military vets. We talk a lot about the military's involvement in the paranormal, you know, what the U.S. military might know about UFOs and things of that nature.
So what do you think the U.S. military knows about UFOs?
I don't think they know anything. I don't think they know anything more than you and I know. I think that they have more proof that UFOs exist, you know, footage and video footage, film footage, and so on. But I don't think they know where they come from or what they are.
What is your hypothesis on what they are and where they come from?
Well, after doing the book UFOs in Wartime, I just came to the conclusion. It took me about a year to research that book, and I was just kind of, just inundated with all different kinds of research and information, so on. And I just came to the conclusion, I'm not the first one to come to this conclusion, but I think there's a chance that what UFOs are time travelers, time tourists. I think that they might be from a time in the future where people are able to travel in time and they come back and want to see history as it's being made.
So does that make this planet and this specific time in the time-space continuum an amusement park for time travelers?
Well, more like a history lesson, you know, more like a history class. And the reason this came to me is that when we were doing UFOs in wartime, there were just so many instances in which what they called foo fighters back then in World War II. So many instances of pilots seeing these, flying saucers and cigar-shaped craft as well, flying off their wing during bombing missions, in the middle bombing missions, and so on. They would trail bombers back and forth to their bases. I mean, there were literally thousands of these reports, but no reports of any kind of exchange of gunfire or weapons or anything like that. So it just seemed like these things are out there watching us go to war.
Sure.
Frankly, and that to me just says history. So, like a history class.
So tell me, with all these reports that are out there, how many pictures are there of Foo Fighters?
Oh boy, that I don't know. I don't know the exact number.
Are there a lot?
Excuse me?
Are there a lot of photos of Foo Fighters?
Not that I've seen, to tell you the truth. And a lot of the photos that I've seen actually have these balls of light,
right?
That a lot of people saw as Foo Fighters, but just from the eyewitness accounts, and also what would happen is the pilots would come back and they would be debriefed, and they would have to fill out almost like a form what happened during the bombing mission for their intelligence officers, and they would report these things. But the American military back then, or the American 8th Air Force in the UK, at the time, their idea of the whole thing was, hey, listen, we have to win this war, and what these things are, who knows what they are. And a lot of people, the British Royal Air Force as well, just that they assumed they were German secret weapons, and once we won the war, we would find out what they were.
With all the different film crews that were up there and the film footage that is available of the bombing missions and, the flight to the mission and back to the mission, you'd think that with the numbers of reported Foo Fighter sightings that were made by members of the aircraft crews, that some of these independent or some of these newsreel camera people would have gotten shots of the Foo Fighters.
Well, we know that RAF filmmakers, first of all, back in the early 40s now, when you were bringing, when you're on a bombing mission, everything has to do with the weight of the aircraft. And so bringing an extra guy and his equipment as a cameraman, that's something that they would have to take into consideration. But also in the Royal Air Force, we know that they have some footage, really graphic footage, of a UFO following a British Lancaster reconnaissance bomber. And this footage was shown to Winston Churchill, who immediately said, I want this to be impounded for 50 years. I don't want anyone to see this for 50 years, because he thought if there was another race, another entity who would come to Earth, that it would ruin religion, as he put it. He thought that religion would go down the drain if people thought that, we weren't alone in the universe. So where that footage actually wound up, who knows? But and just like today, the U.S. military has, who knows how much footage they have of UFOs stashed away, classified. We just don't see it. And I think in some cases that happened in World War II.
But out of those cases and the video footage that the U.S. military has today of what we call UFOs, how many are actually experimental aircraft, new weapon designs?
Well, I'm sure a lot of it is, and I'm sure a lot of what civilians see are actually secret aircraft being tested, or just aircraft that are around today that are being misidentified. That's definitely a large part of it, and we know that in the past, in the 50s, that the CIA actually came up with this idea that when you're testing a secret aircraft, let's say you would fly a secret aircraft over the city of Los Angeles, and they would actually check the newspapers the next day to see how many people were reporting UFOs. And that way, that was one way that you could tell that your secret aircraft could be seen from the ground, and maybe fly it a little bit higher. So they have used UFOs as kind of the cover stories in the past. And also when people see when people see a B-2 bomber for the first time, it's the flying wing. Yeah. If you didn't know what that was, your only conclusion could be is that it was something from outer space.
Are there more UFO sightings in wartime or in peacetime?
Well, that's what we try to look into with the book.
Right.
It seems like there are more. Let me put it that way. It just seems like there are more. And one of the things we discuss in the book is that why is this? Is that because in wartime there were more airplanes in the air, and so there are more opportunity for people to see things, more people on the ground are looking up. Who knows? But then this idea also is that Well, these things are showing up at great events, great events being World War II. And that led to the idea that, maybe it's something else. Maybe they're just, as I said, time tourists,
Sure.
coming back to see history.
What is your opinion of the Kenneth Arnold sighting?
Well, it's an interesting sighting in many ways because, not only because of it, did the term flying saucers come into, our vernacular, let's say, but it was the first time when he reported his sighting, all of a sudden for the next 2 weeks, there was nothing but, there were just hundreds and hundreds of UFO sightings across the country, flying saucer sightings, they called them. And it I hate to say it caught on, but, people were, looking up, I guess, and
Sure.
they just saw more things than the week before the Arnold, sighting happened. But what was also interesting about his sighting is that the way that the UFOs were moving, that gave rise to the name flying saucer, because he said they were like saucers skipping across a pond. But just the way that they moved, they were almost flying in formation. And, a lot of times people see UFOs, they're kind of dashing about here and there, and it doesn't look like, there's really any rhyme or reason to it.
Mac, I'm going to have to ask you to hold on. I've got to take my break. Please stand by. We'll continue this on the other side, X-Zone Nation. Mack Maloney's our very special guest this hour. He is the host of Mack Maloney's Military X-Files radio show. He's also the author of UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know. His website, www.mackmaloney.com, and Mac and I will return on the other side of this break. Don't go away. And welcome back to the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. My guest this hour, X-Zone Nation, is Mack Maloney. He is the host of Mack Maloney's Military X-Files radio show, and he's also an author of more than 40 books, including UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know. His website is mackmaloney.com. Mac, before we went to the break, we were discussing the Kenneth Arnold case, and you were just bringing up a very interesting point that the UFOs that he reported seeing were basically flying in a formation. What does this tell you?
Well, years later, when the Air Force started Blue Book, Project Blue Book, where they were supposed to be looking into, UFO sightings, and they didn't really do a very good job. However, Captain Relpold, who was the person who was running it in the early 50s, he came upon a case where it seemed like a UFO was flying search patterns actually over Tokyo Bay, and it just, the idea dawned on him was, do UFOs do they fly in like kind of haphazardly, or is there some kind of intelligence behind what they do? Like his example was a flock of bees. A swarm of bees. They're just flying here, there, and everywhere. Yes. But like a flock of geese actually are flying in a chevron, and there's intelligent movement behind what they're doing.
And they're also following an electromagnetic GPS.
Or something, you know. But the thing was that, the Arnold sighting, he saw them, they like turned as one, and they were making their way, around the peaks of the Cascade Mountains, and they were all kind of moving almost like in unison, almost like in formation. And that's why that's also a key sighting.
But wasn't there also a search going on for a downed aircraft at that time? And is it possible that the craft that were seen by Arnold were actually part of a military unit who had been dispatched to that unit looking for the downed aircraft?
Well, he was first of all, he was a really smart guy, and he was a seasoned pilot. And one thing about pilots, we talk to a lot of military pilots on our show. In fact, one of our co-hosts is a military pilot. And one thing you learn about them is that they know everything they've seen everything up there and they know what everything up there is. If they see something that they know what it is, know what it isn't, I mean, that is really something unusual. You know, they know what Venus looks like in the daytime. They know what the North Star looks like. They know, you know, what reflections off the water look like. They just know all this stuff. And when they see something out of the ordinary, then as I say, it's you know, something very unusual. And I think that Arnold, the type of guy he was, knowledgeable guy he was, I think he'd know the difference between search planes and, you know, whatever these things were.
In your opinion, is there a connection between the Arnold case and the crash at Roswell?
No, I don't believe anything happened at Roswell. I don't think anything
agree.
happened there other than a balloon that the U.S. military was testing at the time and launching from nearby to send acoustical devices over the Soviet Union.
So you're talking about Project Mogul.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You know, I mean, and one of them crashed, and that was it. And you know, the Air Force, because it happened only 2 weeks after the Arnold sighting, and as I said before, the country had gone flying saucer crazy all of a sudden, and now they find this quote-unquote debris, and the people at Roswell, the air base at Roswell, I think either they jumped the gun or saying that, you know, we have captured a flying saucer or the remains of one, or the idea from the very beginning was to cover up Project Mogul. And they used as I was saying, the CIA tried it. They were using the flying saucer excuse as their cover up of this highly secret Project Mogul.
What always baffled me about the Roswell case, and I spoke to Jesse Marcel Jr. about this. I've talked to Stanton Friedman about this, and all the other so-called experts about the Roswell case, is why did Jesse Marcel, a seasoned intelligence officer who was dispatched to investigate the scene, pick up pieces of the debris, and instead of maintaining the chain of custody of the articles, why did he stop at home and let his wife and his child manhandle evidence?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's question number one.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the debris, they found rope in some of the debris. Would a UFO actually have rope on board, you know?
Is it possible?
I got to say this, though. Jesse Marcel Jr., he was on our show. He's since passed away.
Yes,
he was on our show, boy, it must have been 3 years ago. Shortly before he died, and he was one of the nicest people I think I've ever talked to on the radio. He was just a great guy. We were going to have an argument with him about what happened there and whatnot, and we couldn't because he was just such a good guy, and we kind of miss him.
Yes, he was a great guy. Is it possible that what happened at Roswell was actually one of the Fugo balloons?
One of the what balloons is that, please?
Fugo.
Fugo balloon?
Yes. You know, the Fugo balloons, there were 3,000 of them that were launched from an island off of Japan's coast just prior to the end of World War II. There was one that crashed in Oregon. There had been sightings right across into the middle of America. And they were made of something like paper, but it was, I forget it, it was rubberized. And it was silver. They could either carry equipment, bombs, or personnel.
Right. I doubt that because, you know, I know that they launched, the Japanese launched these kind of balloons all during the war, mostly towards the end of the war. And as you say, you know, a lot of them landed in Oregon and Northern California and everything.
Right.
For one to make it down to New Mexico, that would have been quite the trip. And I think there's also a lot of evidence, too. I mean, the photographic evidence, when you actually see the debris all kind of lined up together, you know, it looks like, you know, one of these mogul balloons right down to the material they used, which was a kind of, I don't know, like a rubberized aluminum.
Yes.
You would, and if in fact you crushed it in your fist when you opened it up, it would go back to its shape. That is nothing from outer space. That was something that, you know, our scientists had developed for these balloons because they have to. The higher they go, they have to expand, and there's a whole lot of kind of physics behind it. You know.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about Foo Fighters. What are scare ships?
Well, scare ships are something that popped up in 1909 in the United Kingdom. Now, everyone knew, as people can know these things, that there was going to be a war between the UK and Germany and, you know, half the world, right? So the Germans were, interested in what was going on in the UK, let's say. But 1909, these people, starting off just a policeman walking his beat, and then in the next 6 months, thousands of these sightings of these scare ships happened. What they were enormous ships that looked most closely resembled a Zeppelin, but they were much bigger. They moved much quicker, and they flew much lower. And people started seeing these things, as I say, all over the United Kingdom. And they didn't know what they were. At the time, the most of the Zeppelins that had been manufactured by that point, were only allowed to do tethered flight. They never really got free from the Earth. And certainly no Zeppelins could make it to the UK and back in a round trip like that. So no one ever really figured out what these things were, but they do know that some of them were seen traveling at 200 knots. Now, a blimp these days, even the most modern blimps, don't go more than 50 miles an hour. But at one point, these two reporters were set up at different villages. One saw a scare ship go over and called down to his colleague and said, "All right, you tell me when it goes over you." And by measuring the distance and the time it took the scare ship to make that distance, they figured out these things were going more than 200 knots. So no one ever figured out what they were. They were also seen a lot of times with very large searchlights on their bottom, shining down at the ground. They were only seen at night. And if people said, "Well, if these are German spy ships, I mean, why would you be flying around with these huge searchlights on? That's not a good way to be a spy." And then they just kind of faded away. And again, there's several examples in the book of these instances where they're not quite UFOs. They're not the flying saucers that we think of when we think of UFOs, but there's these strange things. And the scare ships are one of those instances.
What about the great airships that were seen over the Midwest in the United States? Was that after the scare ships? And do you think could be a possible connection between the two?
That was actually before. That was in the late 1800s. There was lots of reports of these. They weren't as massive as the scare ships were reported to be, but there were these airships that it seemed to start in California. They worked their way right across the country. In fact, where I am now, I'm a little bit north of Boston, and there's a city here, Lynn, Massachusetts, where there's a photograph of one of these things out over the water that people saw. Once again, people have no idea where these things came from. It was beyond the technology of the time. It could not be explained. They kind of faded away at the end of the 1800s, and then 1909, this kind of different variation, a larger, more sinister version of these airships, just kind of popped up over the United Kingdom.
You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by. Exonation, my guest this hour is Mack Maloney. He is the host of Mack Maloney's Military X-Files radio show. He has authored more than 40 books, including UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know, and Beyond Area 51, plus the best-selling Wingman military adventure series. He's served as a consultant for a research firm working with U.S. intelligence agencies and is a member of the rock band Sky Club. And Mack and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as the X-Zone continues from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, you can still get your complimentary copy of the most current edition of the X Chronicles newspaper with our compliments at www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. We'll be back after this break. Don't go away. Mack Maloney is my special guest this hour, X Zone Nation, www.mackmaloney.com. Mack, another book that you've written is entitled Beyond Area 51. What is Beyond Area 51?
Well, that's a good question. Now, what that book is about it's about very secret bases that we know that exist around the world. All of them except Area 51. So it's beyond Area 51. There's, I think, I don't know, about 25, 26 examples that we found of places in the United States and, as I say, around the world that are on somewhere or other, comparable to Area 51. All of which have a UFO history behind them too, as well, as it turns out.
Why do you think it's so important that the citizens of the United States know where all these bases are? Isn't there a matter that crosses a line when it comes to national security?
Well, first of all, they're not all our bases. With the bases, the U.S. bases that we talk about, they're all been well documented. I mean, like places like AUTEC, AUTEC. That is basically the U.S. Navy's Area 51. It's where they test a lot of secret weapons, a lot of secret technology. And the strange thing about it is that it's not in the United States at all. It's actually on Andros Island in the Bahamas, and it's right in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. Now, it might be just some kind of crazy coincidence. I'm sure it is. But the truth of the matter is the U.S. Navy's Area 51 is inside the Bermuda Triangle.
Okay, you said, and not all of them are our bases. Whose bases are they then if they're not our bases?
Well, for instance, we do one chapter on trying to find Britain's Area 51. We came down to 10, chances, 10 different places that could be what they consider Area 51 in the UK. A lot of them were joint British and United States NSA listening stations. There's a few secret bases in England. The thing about England is that it's a small country, and in a jet fighter you can go from coast to coast in a matter of minutes. So to hide someplace where you're testing secret weapons is a really tough thing. And we finally got into guessing that it might be underneath this old abandoned kind of manor out near, as it turns out, near Stonehenge. Once again, if it's a coincidence, who knows? But Rudlow Manor is the name of this place where they used to build Spitfires down below in an underground chamber underneath this place, and built a secret rail line into London to deliver these fighters for the Battle of Britain. So there's a lot of people think that just kind of continued on into the modern day. Things like that.
Okay, one of the most talked about UFO sightings of current time, I'd have to go to the Phoenix Lights. What is your opinion, and not only your opinion, but the opinion of your two co-hosts who are military when it comes to what the Phoenix Lights might be? Right.
That whole thing, what happened out there during that period of time, it's really two stories in a way. I mean, people saw, you see the famous video of the bright lights disappearing behind the mountain. Okay, well, at the time, there's an Air Force base right out there, and at the time there were some National Guard troops that were practicing with dropping flares. And when you kind of see the video and you kind of see the lights disappear behind the mountains, that's how flares would act. But right around the same time, people were seeing these enormous, triangle-shaped UFOs flying over them, multicolored and similar in shape and description to the Hudson Valley sightings of the 80s.
Right.
And these were not flares. These aren't flares. These are like things that people say were the size of aircraft carriers floating over their heads. Lots of lights, lots of kind of dynamic, edges to them and design to them, and something from really not of this world.
But how come nobody took pictures of that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we have to ask that in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
It was late at night. There was some video of these things going overhead. The people towards the south of Phoenix saw these things, and there was some grainy footage of something going over their head. It doesn't look like an airplane. It's not flying fast enough to be an airplane. So Who knows what they were, but the whole thing is a strange case. Like I say, it's actually two cases in one.
To your knowledge, was there any comment from the military or civilian air traffic control when it came to radar tracks and targeting?
Some people at the Phoenix airport said that they saw, radar indications, but once again, there's an Air Force base very close there. I can't remember the name of it, but they do like a lot of training and such. And so there's military activity close by. And they announced that, yeah, these were actually flares being dropped, but they never really explained, what these large objects in the triangle objects in the sky is. And you mentioned my two co-hosts, Commander Cobra. He's someone who's a specialist. He's on this whole kind of triangular type UFO that people have been seeing for years, all various shapes and sizes, but it's always this kind of triangle. And if there's any UFO out there that is in fact, a top secret weapon of the U.S., it's probably these triangle-shaped things, Even for those huge craft that they saw in Phoenix, there's actually talk out there that they have these balloons out there where they're actually powered balloons, and the bottom of them are able to reflect the stars above them, so they're able to project like the stars on their underbellies, let's say, so they can go right over your head, and you don't even know it.
Wow.
These things may be might have been what people saw over Phoenix during that period of time.
We talked about Foo Fighters in World War II, but what about the other conflicts or wars that the United States and Canada have been involved with? For example, the Korean War and the war in Vietnam. Were there UFO sightings there as well?
Well, yes, in the Korean War especially, and the Korean War is really has its own special chapter in the history of UFOs, and this is why. It was only 5 years after the end of World War II that the Korean War started, and it was kind of like this unexpected war. But in that time, we had progressed from mostly propeller-driven aircraft to jet aircraft,
right?
Both bombers and fighters. And along with that technology came onboard radar. Onboard radar in World War II, they had it, but it was very crude, heavy, and it really didn't work very well. By that time, by the early 50s, you had some pretty good radar that was actually in the planes itself. So there were many sightings over Korea that therefore were seen by people on the ground, were seen by radar stations on the ground, and were seen by radars in these jet fighters themselves, these bombers themselves. So all of a sudden you have this kind of triangle of evidence, electronic evidence and visual evidence. And there were so many airplanes flying around, radar-equipped airplanes flying around Korea at the time. And Korea, again, is also a small place that lots of pilots saw UFOs, lots of pilots reported them. There's a lot of documentation on it. And that really, what was happening in the Korean War actually spurred the U.S. Air Force to create Project Blue Book. They knew they had to do something because, once again, so many of our own pilots saw these things. They knew they had to do something. So Project Blue Book was the result. So, the Korean War was really kind of like, what happened there really kind of set the pace for UFO research, if you can call it that, for the next 20 years or so, until they did away with it in 1967. In Vietnam, there's a story called the Hobart Incident, in which, let me just preface saying that UFOs was reported a lot over Vietnam as well. In 1968, people, the U.S. reported seeing what they called enemy helicopters over the DMZ, which separated North Vietnam and South Vietnam, but the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese didn't have helicopters. They didn't fly helicopters in the war, really. So anyway, one night all these enemy helicopters, as they say, were flying around, and the U.S. Air Force sent F-4 Phantoms after them. They chased these things, which were UFOs, and chased them out over the Gulf of Tonkin, fired on them, and the air-to-air missiles from the F-4 Phantoms actually hit this Australian destroyer cruiser, the Hobart, killed 3 sailors, injured about 30 more. They covered it up in the U.S., but in Australia it was a pretty big story. And the story was U.S. aircraft shooting at UFOs actually hit an Australian ship and killed 3 sailors.
My gosh.
Yeah.
So did we learn anything about the UFOs between World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War? Or are we still guessing?
I think we're still guessing, I think we're still guessing because, and it's funny, as I said before, I believe the U.S. military has a lot more evidence that they exist, but
Right.
I don't think that they know where they're from, what they are, or anything along those lines. This recent information that came out at the end of last year, that it turns out that instead of they did away with Project Blue Book in 1967, and the Air Force said, now we're out of the UFO investigating business. And now we know that that's not true, that they were contracting it out, or they had a very, very secret kind of department in the Pentagon who have always been looking at these things. And there's a good chance that they are still doing that.
All right, Mac, stand by, buddy. We've got to take our final break. X-Zone Nation, Mack Maloney is our special guest. He is the host of Mack Maloney's Military X-Files radio show. His website is www.mackmaloney.com. We'll both be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. X-Zone Nation, Mack Maloney is my guest this hour. He is the host of Mack Maloney's Military X-Files radio show. His website is www.mackmaloney.com. He is the author of over 40 books, including UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know, and Beyond Area 51. Once again, his website is mackmaloney.com. First of all, Mac, thanks so much for sharing your time with us here on the X-Zone. Great talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Let's go back in time, not so far back, but let's go to September the 11th. Mm-hmm. Do you, there was a lot of talk that UFOs may have had something to do with the events of 9/11. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that's, a little too way out there. I think that we all know, what happened on 9/11,
Yep.
But the interesting thing about that was, just to show you, what the military's involvement is in UFO, research, let's say, is after that happened, there were a lot of, for the next 2 or 3 years, there was a lot of our military, in the air around the borders of the U.S. There were more flights, there were more planes intercepted, there were just more airplanes up there. And someone told me in the course of the research of UFOs in wartime is that these pilots saw and reported lots of UFOs, and had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks themselves, but as a result of 9/11, a lot of planes are flying around up there, and UFO reports by military pilots went up.
Why do you think, or do you think, that the government just doesn't come clean with what they know instead of, keeping it under a self-imposed blanket of secrecy? If they don't know anything, would people believe them if they came out and said, listen, we don't know what we're dealing with? Or
Right.
There's got to be a reason.
I don't think they would want to do that because then basically, in the matter of the U.S. Military, you'd be saying, well, you're getting nearly $1 trillion every year here. You're supposed to be in charge of our security, and you're telling us that this is something that is in our skies that you don't know what it is. So it's best for them to not say anything, one way or the other. Okay. And once again, I truly believe that they do not know what these things are. Once again, they have plenty of evidence, but they don't know what they are. And I have to say, too, not to get into politics, but of any president or any resident of the White House over the past, since the Kenneth Arnold sighting, if there was one who was going to come out and tell everybody that, yes, the U.S. military knows what UFOs are, it's the current resident in the White House. And that hasn't happened.
I agree.
And that just further convinces me that they don't know.
Let me ask you this. Based on your experience in the military, based on your experience as a talk show host, based on your experience as an author who has dealt with this, do you believe in your heart of hearts that these UFOs mean any harm to this planet or its inhabitants?
Well, it's a really good question because, overall, they have not shown any kind of aggressive nature. However, there are instances, the Mandrell case in the early 50s where a P-51 Mustang called F-51 Mustangs at the time, chased a UFO and the pilot was later killed. There's a couple instances in the Iraq War and the first Gulf War where supposedly there was exchange of weapons between F-16s and UFOs. But I don't believe so because I think that they would have shown it already. They've been around for a long time. They don't try to hide. People think UFOs trying to hide, but they're seen all the time. They're not. They know we know that they're up there, and once again, it just kind of comes back to this theory, that they're just observing us. They're looking in on us. They're watching us, seeing what we do, and that's what history is all about. Who wouldn't love to go back and see a Shakespeare play or the Battle of Troy or something?
Tell us about Mack Maloney's Haunted Universe.
That's a book that we have coming out at the end of September, and basically what it is, it's a combination of all the stories that we have done on the radio show,
right?
Meaning lots of ghost ships, ghost airplanes, ghosts on the battlefield, and also I worked for True TV a few years ago and used to work on their website, and a lot of the research that I got from that experience I put into this book. So it's Mack Maloney's Haunted Universe.
So you also deal with ghosts and other aspects of the paranormal?
Yes, right. Yeah, we got into ghosts. We got into monsters. There's a monster for every state in the United States, and things along those lines. Lots of lists, lots of anecdotes about different paranormal things that people have reported.
So tell me, what do you think a ghost is?
I don't know. We talk about this a lot on the show, and one of our correspondents, Emily Mittermeier, is somebody who is really into ghosts, and it's hard to say because, sometimes they interact with people, sometimes they don't. They call it residual haunting, where it seems like a videotape that's like caught in a loop, But then again, so what is that, And then, but actual, instances where people have talked to ghosts or where furniture is flung around the room and so on. And I don't know. It's just very strange. But as we say about UFOs, it something has to be behind it because every ghost story in the world cannot be a hoax, cannot be a lie. Every UFO story cannot be a hoax or a hallucination. There's got to be something behind them.
But if you go by the numbers of UFO researchers, the number of ghost researchers, the number of Bigfoot researchers, for all these people being out there all the time with modern technology, still no smoking gun,
right?
The numbers don't add up.
Right. It's almost in the case of UFOs it's almost like that's the way it's planned. Once again, just if we went to the time travel element again, maybe they know that UFOs aren't going to be revealed until June 2nd of 2032. So they know everything that they do between now and then, they're not going to be found out.
But they are being found out.
Say it again, please. I'm sorry.
They are being found out. They are being seen.
Their origin, where they come from. Where do they come from? Everyone, just because they're in our skies, that doesn't mean they're little green men from Mars. There's a good chance they're from other dimensions, other universes, places we don't even know about.
But if we
the same thing.
But if we accept the possibility that these are time travelers who are coming here to view history, how do we explain the alien abduction scenario? How do we explain what happened to Travis Walton? How do we explain what happened to Barney and Betty Hill?
Right. Yeah. See, that's one of those things you can't explain. No. Who knows? Who knows? And why? Another question we talk about in the show a lot is that, when you're abducted, a lot of people, they report some nasty medical experiments, taking place on them. You say, well, why would a race that was so intelligent that they're flying around in flying saucers, why would they be interested in blood samples? And,
Exactly.
you think that they would be so far advanced you wouldn't have to actually, probe someone to get this information. So, once again, millions of questions.
Yeah, millions of questions and next to no answers. I guess we can thank the extraterrestrials who have abducted people over the years for the colonoscopy that we all get today.
Well, if insurance covers it, why not, right?
How true, how true. Listen, what are your final thoughts tonight, Mac? What would you like to share with the X Zone Nation?
Mm-hmm. Well, only that, just since I've been kind of in the UFO community for a few years doing the books and doing a radio show, what disturbs me a lot is that there's a lot of noise out there. There's 10% of what you read, in my opinion, about UFOs, about Roswell, about things of that nature. It's just stuff that is just made up out of whole cloth. And I think that really affects the really down-to-earth, pardon the pun, research on UFOs, So I just wish people, writing these books would really just take a little bit more care to, not make up out lies, which a lot of it is. A lot of it is really wild speculation. With Roswell, for instance, I think, the count is that 30 UFOs crashed there and there's 50 alien bodies and so on. That's just ridiculous. And it really kind of takes away from what should be really solid research into trying to find out what the UFO puzzle, is all about.
I always say that, the internet is the biggest septic tank that has been ever created by men because there's more crap in it than there is anything else.
Yeah, it's true, and since the internet has come about, this kind of, the noise that's around UFO research is just, is off the charts.
It is. Quickly, let our listeners know where they can find out more about you, where they can buy your books, and how they can listen to your radio show.
Well, the books are all, in your local bookstores or Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. And MackMaloney.com is the website. The name of the show is Mack Maloney's Military X-Files. And we're on about 6 or 7 networks. If you just Google Mack Maloney's Military X-Files, you'll find out where you can hear us.
Excellent. Mac, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to the next time you and I meet back here in the X Zone.
Great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good night, Mac. That was Mack Maloney, X Zone Nation, www.mackmaloney.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, X Zone Nation, you can get a copy of the current edition of the X Chronicles newspaper with our compliments at www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. And don't forget, www.xzbn.net for all our radio shows and our listings, and to watch us on the X Zone TV channel, simultv.com.